Hi everyone, welcome back. And as you can see, I'm not here by myself. I'm here with Roey and with Thea Flowers. And this session kind of like connects directly with like the session that we had previously with Berthold. But this time we are actually talking to two of the people who are building the tools that Berthold built himself for his prosthetic. The title of this session might be a bit misleading, artists as makers, because I think that makers are artists as well. So it's kind of like the double role of a maker has always been an artist and a maker at the same time. But I'm here with Roey and with Thea, and Roey runs a project called the Synth UX Academy. He runs a super interesting podcast that's focusing on Synth UX design, and Thea is actually one of the people who builds these amazing new kind of interfaces and synthesizers that Roey likes to talk about. And that's why I'm leaving the stage now. I'm giving it to Roey, who is going to lead this conversation with Thea, and I'm going to come back. If you have any questions, ask it into the chat, and I will come back on stage in about 20, 30 minutes, and then we will ask all the questions that you might have. So the stage is yours.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And thank you for everyone in Most Wanted Music, and thanks Thea for joining us here. My name is Roey Tsemah. Actually, I'm originally from Israel, but I live now in the Netherlands. And I'm a self-learning kind of person. I was always into all sorts of like musical instruments. I started playing music in a young age, and I just played a lot of stuff just because I was curious. But I remember the first time that I had to download the PDF of Cubase and read it because YouTube did not exist. That is how old I am.
You read manuals. You're basically a dinosaur.
I literally read a manual, yes. And a few years ago, a teacher asked me if I could start teaching. I just graduated from the Art Academy in The Hague, and they asked me if I could teach how to work with Illustrator from everything in the world. And I was really surprised because I thought that it's kind of irrelevant to just learn a program. You just need to learn how to learn these kind of things, and then you have that superpower of a creator. You can just figure things out, and your skill set is growing as the industry grows. Everything that I did since then is around this space. I'm always trying to build communities of artists, creators, engineers, combine them together and see how they can teach one another. And I was fortunate enough to meet Thea just a few weeks ago, or maybe 2 months ago or something like that, because she's a huge inspiration for me and for many of the students who are really reliant on the resources that she brings to the table, to the online space. And when I'm talking about resources, I mean not only educational materials that are really, really easy to understand, although she talks about fairly complicated subjects, but also open source projects. And she also has her own, I'm now doing an introduction for you. Maybe it's good if you explain a little bit about yourself, and then we go back to this.
Honestly, that was an extremely flattering introduction. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like as Roey said, I am all about open source hardware. I'm also a self-learner. I started programming when I was a teenager because I wanted to make video games. That never actually happened, but I did end up working in software for a while and doing a lot of open source stuff, especially in the Python programming language community. And then a couple years ago, I decided to run away from that and do hardware instead, and specifically music technology. And it's been an interesting journey, and bringing some of my philosophy around open source software to hardware has been really interesting, especially in an industry where a lot of the designs and ideas behind music technology are treated as like a closely guarded secret. Whereas like for me, I'm not only making my designs open source, I'm also writing about them so that people can more easily understand them. So I don't know. I think I learned through open source. I learned through people sharing. I learned through people, talking about this and being on forums and helping, newcomers who had no idea what they were doing figure stuff out. And I feel not only obligated, but like proud to contribute back to that and help new people get into this.
Thanks. Yeah, so I really feel like it's a whole stream of people, especially in this industry of hardware, synthesizers, wearable devices, interactive experiences. So maybe we should expand this a bit, because actually the classes that I teach, they don't really build synthesizers per se, but more like interactive installations and sound art devices and anything that has to do with this. But I think that what I'm most proud of is that when students start, or even people who join the community who start out, many of them have never coded in their lives. So it's a very interesting starting point that I get to talk to them in this first moment, and they have this struggle in their eyes, like, I don't know where to start. And I say, well, here are some keywords, and try to play around with these and see what you can find. And I'm really always surprised at how fast they get things going if you just give them the right direction, and they don't get completely lost in the whole world of information, because obviously there is way too much information out there. And sometimes projects like Thea can be hard to find because of this clutter of information. I feel like I actually come from UX design, and I've been working for clients for many years, building websites and applications, and I'm also coming from software. So YouTube is just full of people who are teaching UX design. But then when it comes to building hardware, all of a sudden, this is gone. It's like there is no information. Where do I find stuff? So I wanted to maybe just show a glimpse to what I find really interesting about Thea's work, and maybe Thea, you can show your page about the Juno here. And I'm assuming that some of the people who are watching us now know the Juno 106.
Yes, I hope so. Yeah. One of the things Roey mentions is that it's hard to find resources about hardware, like not only just like how they're designed and how to build them, but like deep, in-depth explanations as to why they exist. And there's a lot of beginner resources, but there's not a lot of resources that take you from beginner to being able to actually produce a product and understanding how these products work. And so my personal content is trying to fill that gap. And so with the Roland Juno, I love the synthesizer. It is my favorite synthesizer. I wanted to completely explain how the oscillator inside of it works, not only from how it sounds and how to use it, but the actual circuitry and theory behind every single aspect of this oscillator. And I'm slowly scrolling through this page, and it kind of like the idea behind this page is to just gradually build up people's understanding of the fundamental operation of this circuit with interactive, sort of illustrations and, step by step, just how does this actually work? And it's honestly one of my favorite things that I've ever made. It really just shows how every aspect of this design interacts with each other. It even shows you how they came up with the component values that they use, which has always been a mystery to me. Whenever I look at existing circuits, I'm like, why did they pick that resistor or that capacitor? And it took me a long time to figure that out. So I figured I would write about it. And so this is a really in-depth article. It goes through the whole thing. And yeah, it's a great resource to kind of close that gap between, okay, I know theoretically how to make an oscillator, or, I've made something simple, but how do I actually take that to the next level? How do I, design something that could actually end up in a product? And what are those things I need to worry about?
Yeah. And I would add that when I look at something like this, I see this itself as a product. So like really, because there is a very big difference between just making an instrument and making something that people can really read through and understand in a language that they can bear and not get lost, and also having all these visuals that are really well thought and interactive elements that people can really play around with to get these abstract concepts to a more tangible thing that they can really relate to and build upon. I just think this is remarkable, and I would also like if you could go to the page on the honking button.
Sure.
Yeah, I missed the big honking button. Yeah, maybe you can talk about this, but what I really love about this project and other projects as well is that like the amount of educational material in it really feels like it's part of the product. It's not about this being something you can play, although obviously you could. It's about this being something you can play and learn how to actually code stuff, because hey, there are like snippets of code here and maybe you can tweak this and maybe you can tweak that, and all of a sudden this becomes something so much bigger than just another instrument or another module that you buy. And I think this is fascinating, and I basically just explained everything about it.
That's totally cool. I mean, that's exactly my intent with this, right? Like, Big Honking Button is a little module. It's pretty inexpensive, and the whole point of it is that you're not supposed to just buy it and leave it as it is, right? You're supposed to buy it and customize it, and people have done some really interesting things with it. It's a little sampler. Basically, when you press the button, it plays a sample. It comes out of the box playing a honk sample. So when you press it, it honks at you. It's incredible. But there's all kinds of things that you can do because it runs Python. And you can just plug it into your computer and edit a text file. You don't have to like have some complicated programmer or even like, an IDE or anything. You can just edit it in Notepad. And you can change it and change the way it works. You can put new samples on it. You can make it play multiple samples. You can make it play samples at different pitches and backwards. And there's all kinds of cool examples that come with it. And lots of people in the community have done really, really interesting stuff with it. But yeah, the whole point of this product was to be educational, right? The whole point of it was to give people something that is constrained in a way, but also gives them a place to start exploring code.
And Thea, when you think about the people who are, like from your experience, from the customers that you have at the moment, do you feel like, on what level are they when they start with this?
I mean, we've had customers from all different walks, essentially. I mean, I've definitely had, because I come from software, like a lot of my initial customers were very familiar with software. But as we gained traction, like we definitely attracted a lot of people who had never touched code before. Mm-hmm. And, working with some of those people, just walking them through the initial steps and seeing their face light up when they save the file and their module reboots automatically and they're like, oh, it's already running the code I wrote. That's awesome. It's really great. So yeah, I mean, I get people from every stage who have never seen code before and who have been writing code for decades.
Yeah. And I'm curious, I don't know if people can interact with us at least to a certain level. Matt?
Yes.
Can people interact with us? Like, I'm really curious if there are any anyone who is interested in these kind of topics and was maybe afraid to get started, or maybe people who are actually doing this.
People can interact with you. People can ask questions in the chat. I can ask, people have heard you now, so it would be cool if people in the chat could basically write into that if they are in any kind of way associated to the world that you are talking about. And that actually, this one question that I have is like, Thea, do you work with musicians on customized, tailor-made stuff for their specific performances, or do you do things because you want to make them the way they are, and there's no it's out of your mind and not with instructions from musicians?
The answer is yes to both of those. I try to lean more on the latter because it lets me reach more people. Sort of. I'm always happy to work with a musician to build something for them, like a performance controller or something like that. But it's always more interesting to me, and I feel more impactful for me to make something open source that lots of people can look at and learn from. And a lot of times when I work with artists and I do consulting gigs like that, I ask them if I can open source the thing afterwards, and I will give them a discount because that's the point to me, right? I'm not in this, industry to make a lot of money and do a bunch of, top secret stuff for, artists. I'm here to empower everyone to make their own things. And I think that's the important part for me.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of different companies who are working this way, especially the smaller ones. And I could name, for example, Erica Synth, that I think is doing great work with just sharing everything that they're not making anymore. But also now they're working on modules that it's funny because I started the synth design podcast, and Gertz from Erica Synth was one of the first people to be really interested in sharing their knowledge and their vision.
That's awesome.
So he was like the fourth person I talked to, and there is this guy called Moritz Klein from Berlin, and he used to give workshops on just locally before COVID, and then during COVID, he started a community on YouTube and started just sharing a lot of knowledge, and he just blew me away. And I started like joining him and working with him on different educational materials, and then he paired with Erica Synth to create modules that will be ridiculously cheap, like 40 euros cheap.
Wow.
That can basically do pretty much everything, and they have all the points to probe to kind of like learn how something works. What happens if you replace this capacitor, and like if you want to do this or if you want to do that, this is how things work. And I think that all this movement in the hardware space towards this direction is really inspiring, because for someone like me who is seeing all these young minds when they're just starting out, and maybe they're drawing really well or they play guitar really well, and they're like, I can play Ableton, but I can't really do further than this. I'm like, it's not rocket science. It's not. Join Discord and let's just talk about it. Share the things, share the goals that you want to reach, and then like we'll pair you with someone and we'll link you to some resources, and all of a sudden you incrementally build these skills that you need to be to be able to realize the ideas that you have in your head.
Yeah, you actually touched on something that's just super important to me, which is like find a community, right? Like the reason I got into music technology was because I was a guitar player, and I was like, well, I like my guitar, but I wanted to do something a little bit differently. And then, I stumbled across old, Telecaster forums or something, or it's like someone's like, okay, here's how you do this wiring mod, and I'm like, cool, and I did it, and I was like, but what did I actually do? And like asking questions, like finding people who are also interested in similar stuff and finding a community is the secret to learning any of this, right? Like none of this is impossible to learn, and none of this is impossible to do. It's all about just surrounding yourself with people who can help you find your way. Mm-hmm. And it's absolutely possible. So
yeah. And it's also nice to see the whole movement of open source on Discord when we have these podcast episodes, and we have some people who are still like, they're coming maybe from the old world of electronics, and they're all of a sudden like listening to a podcast like, you kind of convinced me. I need to sleep on it, but I might just release this product I kept for myself and just for my clients as an open source thing. I'm not sure about this. And it's just really nice to see that people are open to it, and it's just a matter of kind of like sharing this knowledge and explaining how things are done, and based on that, just making decisions and not really being too constrained to what we believe in or what we learned in school. I think that's something I took from the community and from people I interact with.
Yeah, it's great to see people kind of come around on open source. Like, I'm not the kind of person that thinks that every company should give away all of their designs, but I think there's a lot of cases, like you mentioned, Erica Synth giving, like, open sourcing their designs that are out of production. That is awesome. I really wish more companies would do that, but like a lot of people are scared of this, just like, oh, someone's gonna take my thing and steal it and do whatever. And unfortunately, we live in a world where that might happen anyway, right? And sort of my philosophy on that, if I was just thinking from like a purely capitalist point of view, it's just like if my designs might get stolen anyway, and I don't have the legal resources to fight it, then I might as well make it where that it's not just me and some big corporation that cloned my thing can make it. I want to make it where everybody can make it. So, to kind of spite them. It's like, but no, there's actually a more altruistic purpose here, which is that education and repairability and, just in general, I think we should own the devices, the things that we physically have. And I think open source is really the only true way to do that.
Yeah, and you touched also on repairability, and I think this also has to do with sustainability and like, I mean, when we move towards this like new generation and hardware becomes open source, we are actually being much more mindful of the whole community and the whole world and like everything that's related to this. I can also relate to this now. We're plug coming in. We're organizing now an international synth design hackathon that's going to be in January, and there are going to be 8 different academies that are joining from around the world, and each of them is going to run a local event. And the students who are joining are going to get a kit, and it's a surprise kit. They don't know what kind of microcontroller we're going to have there. They don't know what kind of sensors they might get there. They get different design challenges, like physique is like you need to do something with your body, or like I'm not going to say. I'm going to hold myself now. But it's supposed to be a surprise. And then when they get these packages, they have 4 days to design and realize and fabricate their instrument and communicate it. And when I was thanks. And when I was thinking about how I am going to ship all this stuff, I just like at a certain point I just realized it would be ridiculous if I'm going to get now packages from anywhere around the world get to me from the States, for example, and then ship them back to the States in my own package, so it comes with my branding. Like, this is ridiculous. So maybe every academy is going to get a package, and yeah, each teacher will need to assemble the kits on their own, but then we're saving a lot, and we're just more mindful of the bigger picture here. And it's these kind of conversations that are that just make you think this way, and like not just like the traditional way would be like I need to get everything, package everything, and then I sell my own product. I'm like, is this the only way to do it, or can we maybe find out other ways to make things a bit more sustainable and a bit more mindful?
Yeah, it's a big thing. And I think that's a big unanswered question for hardware is how do we make things sustainable? I mean, I think about constantly the materials that go into my physical products, and I really, really try to design things that will not just last a year, that will be useful for years to come, so that I'm not just creating more e-waste. So yeah, we're actually about 23 minutes into this. I wanted to see if Matt had any questions, or if there were any questions from the audience.
There is like a question that I have is like one that buckles me all the time. It's like when you like you talked a lot about open source and the open source community, so which I have done a couple of hackathons, and I'm kind of like connected to this kind of community, but from an outside perspective. So it's a community of partly music makers, but mostly hardware enthusiasts, developers, people who have kind of like this brain activity that's around building things, while musicians often like take the tools that have been built and then create something with them. But what I think is super interesting is like we had a talk earlier today that was about like interactive stems and how music can be manipulated by fans, and the basics could be used and then like develop them further into something else. So what I could imagine is that if like let's say a label or a manager builds like kind of like with your help or with help of the community kind of a controller that's an electronic music producer who is the artist, that he could basically kind of like sell maybe this, or maybe not even sell, but provide the open source tutorial and everything, like with like also a place where you can order all that stuff, and to allow the fans to actually build a device that they can then use to interact with the music that comes from their artists. So what I can see is like what you're doing could be additional merchandising tools, but at the same time, it could also like enhance the creativity of the fans to interact with the music of an artist. So I wonder if labels or if like big music companies are actually tapping into that space. We've seen that with Kanye West released his album with like a device. He's on the album with a device where he had like tons of stems on it, and fans could basically take this device and reorder the stems. And I have never tried it, so I don't know how it actually functions. But I think this is the first step for like making fans able or enabling them to interact with the music of an artist. So I don't know, what's your take on that? Like, could you imagine working for an artist and producing some kind of device that, or maybe like producing a device and then open sourcing it or licensing it or whatever it is with these kind of artists?
Yeah, I think, you know, for something like that, I would love to make something that not only sort of starts as a way for them to interact with the music of one particular artist, but can be reused and changed from there, right? To like kind of take it further. You know, when you were talking about this, I actually thought about Sean Wasabi and the MIDI fighter. I don't know if y'all have ever seen this, but it's a MIDI controller that's like a 8x8 grid of just arcade buttons. And Sean Wasabi has done
somewhere
amazing videos with it, like just done incredible music, and it's inspired a lot of other people to do it. And while it doesn't come specifically with, you know, his stems or samples and stuff, it still has inspired so many people. And there's also open source versions of it available, not by the same company, but by other designers. And that's like something that I could see as like a really useful thing, where it's like, okay, you can get the Sean Wasabi edition of this thing that has, you know, ways that you can interact and remix his music, but also it can be used as a MIDI controller and you can make your own stuff with it and all that stuff. So yeah, I think that's interesting stuff. Like, especially like partnering with artists can get it in the hands of more people, and it could get people interested in it that maybe have never been interested in something like this. But once they, you know, they see someone they admire using it and remixing it, like they can get into it. And that's like one of the biggest on-ramps from transitioning to like someone who just uses tools to someone who makes tools, right? We see people who make video game mods become video game developers, right? Because they just start by changing what they want in the game that they like. And then they're like, oh, I can go way further than this. Let's keep going. So
do you think like this is also a generational thing, like that the generation that grows up now has a different connection to manufacturing, to developing, to this kind of space? Because like I don't know your ages, but in my generation, like I can't code, and I was not a guitar player that got then connected to like doing all the crazy things that you are doing. But I have the feeling that the younger generation now is way more connected to this kind of technology world and way more eager to actually experiment with it, play with it. So is it just like a matter of time until this entire space of like being a maker turns into kind of a mainstream thing, like the game bot thing that you just mentioned? Like, it could be just a matter of time, right?
Is everybody like, look, mom, no computer? That's what you're asking.
I don't know how old he is, but I also don't think that he's like from like if everybody would be like him, then we would have like a crazy variety of like insane instruments out there. But
1 billion
maybe
oscillators.
Yeah, maybe he's just like leading the way, like in some sort of way, as like as a person that gets a lot of visibility. But I guess that there's like tons and hundreds of people out there like him that just don't have like the resources to build like the large installations that he built, but they are not less creative. They just do it on a smaller scale, and they don't have the publicity.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, I mean, I don't know. I'm not part of the, you know, current in generation or whatever. I'm a little older, but what I see from a lot of younger people is, and even people in my generation, is like this sort of response to like always being sort of steeped in technology that you can't understand, right? Like no one knows how the Twitter algorithm works. No one knows how Google figures out its search results. They want things that they can actually deconstruct and figure out, right? It's kind of like the draw of vinyl, right? It's like, oh, I can actually understand how this works, right? I can physically hold this music in my hand, and it's not just coming from the cloud, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And I think there's like a similar thing with that with instruments, right? Like even though we have incredible software instruments available to us, people still buy hardware instruments. People still buy hardware interfaces. And I think it's sort of this like sort of reactionary response to being in a purely digital world most of the time, where people actually want something tactile that they can understand and deconstruct.
And I would also add to this that I think that it has to do with accessibility. The fact that we just have so many resources today and everything is so dirt cheap that it just opens things up. And like it's easier now to do things like if you compare it to 20 years ago. And I actually wanted to share something if we have last moment here. Share screen. If I do share screen, can I share a
try it out.
window? Window, and if I do this, let's see. Do you guys see this?
If you're on Chrome, it should work. If you're not on Chrome, then it shouldn't. No. You like there's usually some person in the back end who has to probably let me share that, but he's in the backstage room right now because like there's the next.
Okay, so you cannot see it. Well, never mind then. It's just that I think that fabrication tools today are opening a whole world for us. So I had students that worked within 6.5, 7 hours and built like an effects box with like a really cool reverb that you can see the spring reverb inside. And like the electronics were like literally, it's just like a bunch of things that are connected together. And it was all about just like taking a special printer, a UV printer that allows you to just print on a piece of aluminum. And if you can do that and just drill a few holes, then all of a sudden you have an instrument that you constructed on your own. And it can be that you got the electronics from somewhere online, and it can be that you just disassembled an effects box that you have and just put the electronics from it inside this thing that you created. And one of my students came up with this really brilliant idea of like, I'm now a pop artist and I want to have this live performance where the synthesizer that I'm playing is going to have these it's going to be like a bright LED screen in the back that the audience is going to see. So when I change the LFO speed, it's going to vibrate like this, and it's going to make like it's going to be like the instrument is part of the performance. So we might think about, especially electronical musical instrument, like, you're in your box and whatever, and no one can really see it. And he was like, yeah, but what if this thing actually has this sort of like a wall here and a wall here, and when I move things around here, the audience see this reflection immediately. And he actually built it in like 6.5 hours.
That's awesome. I mean, we see this stuff like Mike Snow built a giant synthesizer they called the Blob for one of their tours, and it's just this monstrous machine, and like they made it, like it's their thing, and it's like, don't like customize your stuff, like start with that, and then you'll end up just doing all kinds of cool stuff. And I think that's the gateway. I think that's a wonderful gateway for artists.
Yeah, definitely. And just remember that these communities are there online, and people like Thea are there online. And I'm always surprised and like really proud that in my Discord account there are students who just started writing their first line of code, and they would just ask something in the programming channel, and then Thea would just reply. I'm like, when do you have the time for this? And somehow they just get an answer from her, and they probably don't even know who she is. Like, they are just getting started. I think that it's important to remember that the communities are there, the forums are out there, and the fabrication tools are, you can literally buy one for like 500 euros, and you would have like a 3D printer at home and build something with it. So
And
yeah.
the difference with that community is also that it's really collaborative, and that it's something that probably is one of the biggest challenges for people to tap into that community. That in this kind of community, there's a different mindset that, for example, is in the music industry. So I like to say that like a lot, but it's not about like we're gonna change from ecosystems to ecosystems. So we have to have like this collaborative approach to working with each other in order to co-create the future of like music creation and creativity in general. And that doesn't only belong to the music industry and the music business. It belongs to like lots of different industries, and there's like lots of cross-sectoral innovation happening through these different skill sets. So yeah, I would love to like talk with you a lot longer about that, because it's such an interesting topic, and I think so much to learn from it. And but unfortunately, we have to wrap that up now. And thank you so much for your time. It was really insightful and really interesting, and I hope it inspired a couple of people to actually dive into that space. And you can find Thea, I guess, on Instagram and Twitter. The same belongs to Roey. And Roey you can find under Synth UX Academy, and Thea under Winterbloom, I guess. Yeah. And so just search for that. And yeah, as you've seen, like this is like a kind of a community that's really approachable. So I guess if you got inspired, then just like talk with them and connect with them, and do whatever feels right for you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
yes,
hope to see you soon.
Awesome.
And have a great evening or great day here.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.